How many of you are shooting sports currently? Okay, and the other people, I guess, are just getting into it or kind of playing that game. So again, let's go back to what camera bodies are we working with?
I have the Canon 70.
70, the original 70 or the Mark II?
First one.
Okay. So you'll want to start thinking about an upgrade on that camera body just because of a lot of different variables between the frame rate and the quality of the images that are coming out of the newer version of it and the higher ISO ranges that you can shoot in. So for me, shooting at ISO 3000 on a field at night is not a big deal. And I generally, one of the formulas that I use is, everything is at f7.1 because I want depth of field on 1 or 2 players at a time. I don't want 1 player in, 1 player out, and my focus is inside a helmet. So again, skin tones, and again, you look around the room, you've got a lot of different skin tones. Some people's skin absorb light like crazy, some people reflect light. So you've got to play that game a little bit. Play around with metering. How many of you have actually played with the metering modes on your cameras? Anybody? If you haven't, you really want to experiment with that because a lot of times, if you're doing like the youth leagues or the junior leagues, you're in the middle of the day, early morning or late afternoon hours, and light can be really horrific. Giant stadiums actually know better. Late afternoon games suck because half the stadium is in light and half of it's in shadow, and the stadium lights don't do you any good whatsoever. Even though they put them on, doesn't make a bit of difference because now you're fighting the shadows on both sides of the field or the hard shadows from the guys being in the wrong direction. And it always, the best play of the game is always on the wrong side of the field. You know that, right? So, but with that said, there are a bunch of different lenses that I count on for different things. When I hit the field, again, as a hobbyist, you're probably not going to have multiple camera bodies. I try to have at least 2 bodies with me at all times. One is set up for a telephoto and one is set up for a wide angle lens. Because again, sometimes the action does not happen always on the field. It could be on the sideline, it could be in the crowd behind you. So you always want to keep that in mind. These 3 lenses are absolutely prominent in my bag because these are my workhorses. And depending on the time of day and where I'm going, so like I said, if I'm doing the aviation, it's good weather. I don't have to worry about rain and snow or sleet because planes don't fly. They don't have 5 to 8 miles visibility. They don't go up. A football game, soccer game, I'm going to be out there with the big guns and it's going to be on a monopod and I'm going to lug around the heavy duty lens because the weather can change on me at a moment's notice. The other neat thing that I have going for me, especially with these lenses, is that I have the customization available and the feature-rich package coming together. The AF-MF, which is something that you're normally seeing, but the MO is a manual override. So typically on an autofocus motor, you can't override those motors. There's a sensitivity that I can actually set. So I can actually grab the manual focus and override the AF or go back to an AF. The other thing that I probably don't even have in here, and I should mention it because it's a little bit more advanced, is how many of you use back button focus? Nice. It takes a lot of getting used to. It is not a natural thing at first. Once you get it down, once you get used to it, it's second nature. It almost becomes like a nervous tick. You're constantly working that button. You're constantly re-achieving focus. Now mind you, going back to that focus menu thing too, is that continuous autofocus never truly locks focus. So if you put your crosshair on something and you lock your focus and it's continuous, it could jump to the next nearest movement. I like a single servo. I like to know that I'm locking focus on what I'm locking and I want to stay there. If I'm playing the game on a regular field, I'm going to narrow down my groups. Please don't ever use all the auto points because the camera is not smarter than you. And it's going to grab the first point of contrast, and it's not what you think it's going to be. You're thinking player here. It says, no, I like the garbage pail over here, or the piece of trash, or whatever the case may be. So narrow that down to a very finite group, typically 9 to 15 points. If I'm doing the aircraft or larger stuff like trucks or motorcycles, there's a 15-point group that I can use, and a 25-point group. So that gives me a little bit more wherewithal to play with there. The focus limit switch, while it's very useful, I tend to especially with newer photographers, leave it alone because you're going to move it and forget about it, and all of a sudden when you can't focus at a distance, thinking everything's broken, and you're like, crap, I just missed a shot because the switch was in the wrong place. Older lenses, it took more time to hit infinity and come back. That's why primes were a big deal in sports photography, because you could hit the infinity mark and come back and focus faster with a prime. With zoom lenses that are created today, that's not the issue anymore. You can focus 3 times as fast. In a lot of cases, the sharpness is above and beyond what's available on the primes, and you've got the versatility of a zoom lens. So there are some changes that have happened along the way. The locking switch is kind of neat because I can lock these lenses at the marked focal lengths. So if I want to make it a 500 or a 400 millimeter, I can limit where I'm working, or if I'm walking, it doesn't just drop down because of that heavy front element. Stabilization, same as everybody else. We have a position 1 and position 2. The position 1 is for hand holding, so it's an up-down, side-to-side movement of the camera body. And position 2 is if you're mounted and panning. Some of the manufacturers actually throw in an additional axis in there for tracking. I don't know how well it really works, but it's not something that I've ever used. Stabilization is a great thing when you're shooting slower shutter speeds. If I'm shooting 1,000th of a second or more on a 600 millimeter lens or 150 to 600, I'm turning it off because it's not doing me any good. You're actually going to introduce shake into the image because it's looking for movement that doesn't exist. So it starts to have a jitter. So that can actually peg leg you more than help you. Like I said about the weather sealing, so on the 120 to 300 and the 150 to 600 Sport, you have full weather sealing on there. You could just about stick your hand in a bucket of water. Not that I would do that, but you could be in some really crappy conditions. And I've gotten caught short a few times, and it's helped out. If you have any of the other cameras, like a mid-range camera that's not weather sealed, treat yourself to a rain shield, because it'll come in real handy and you can still handle a lot of moisture without any problems. The big thing is you don't want to get moisture inside the lens, and none of the lenses are perfectly sealed. So if you get moisture inside and it stays there, condensation can happen, creating mold. That's the thing that you want to kind of play against. So when you're doing the Home Depot thing, or you're in a place and you see those little silica packets, grab them. Or if you get something in shipping that comes with a silica packet, throw it in your camera bag, because all that's going to do is wick moisture out of the camera bag and help keep things dry. Or even if you're storing things in a questionable environment. I've had customers that, just because of where they live and what they're doing, the AC is on, or the AC goes on and off, and it's just an extreme. It creates moisture, and then the mold that you can create will etch the glass after a period of time, which is bad. But by having those in there, even like a dive shop, the dive shops sell reusable ones. So you put it into your case and you forget about them, and after a period of time, you throw it in the microwave for like 30 seconds, it reactivates the silica. So it dries it out and puts it back out there so you can kind of utilize it again. But I like them when they come for free, and you can get different sizes. So that works out kind of nice too. So again, like I was also saying before about teleconverters, we have a 2x teleconverter. There is no replacement for lens focal length. If you have to go beyond a 1.4 teleconverter, it's time for a new lens. It's time for a longer lens so you can compose better and tighter. You want to fill as much of that frame with information rather than throw it away. If it's this big on the screen, guess what? When you try to enlarge it, it's not going to look pretty. It's not enough information. A 1.4 teleconverter, you're going to lose one stop of light, which is respectable. It'll affect your autofocus, but not terribly. A 2X is a noticeable difference in that, and you will definitely see, a slowdown and lack of focus in what you're doing. On the wide side, I kind of bounce between these two lenses. The 12 to 24. So if I want an extreme wide angle, so like if I'm doing stuff for a local paper, they love extreme wide angle. This is a highly corrected lens, so you're not getting that fisheye look on there. So, and usually when I show the lens, I try to find a gridded ceiling or architecture that you can pick the lens up and look at 12 millimeters, where you're not seeing the bending of perspective. You've got nice straight lines. Again, f4, you're gonna have to play the ISO game, or if you're working outside, you have a lot more wherewithal to kind of work with what you're doing. People get very jammed up and they think that I've got to have an f2.8 lens. How many of you have really fast glass? f2.8, how about faster? 1.8, 1.4? Okay, let me ask you an honest question. How often do you shoot wide open at 1.4?
Not much. A lot of times I'll be at 2.2, something like that.
Not anymore.
Okay, so the biggest problem that you run into is that when you're shooting like that, depending on distances,
You gotta know what you're doing.
that's one. Two is your depth of field is so shallow that if someone turns their head slightly, you've got one eye in focus, one eye out of focus. And then you kind of start questioning, is the image really worth using? There are times, however, you're going to use that lens wide open because you have no choice, because there's just no light to work with, and you don't want to use ISO 400,000. So you definitely need to play that game a little bit. 2470 f2.8 is a pretty common lens in most cases for wide angle. It's a pretty standard thing, or a 24 105. I'll give up that third of a stop to go with the constant f4 on my 24 105 over the 2470 for that little bit of extra reach when I'm doing event work. But then there are times that I need that extra punch for the light, depending on what I'm doing. But be careful with that game about bokeh. You know, everybody loves to talk about bokeh, 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 bokeh. Does everybody understand what bokeh is all about? Yes? No? How many? Show of hands of anybody who doesn't understand bokeh. Anyone? No one? Wow, I'm impressed. So the other neat thing about the bokeh part of things is its reflection and specular highlight. So one of the other claims to fame for Sigma is that our aperture blades are more rounded, so you're getting a more pleasing specular highlight. So the bokeh is prettier, it's a creamier looking. So that's another reason why when you're shooting at wide open apertures, or even with a long lens and using the compression of a long lens like this. You know, this is my 150 to 600. Nice creamy background, right? Well, I got enough distance between the horse and the background where it's working. So it's everything comes together. You don't necessarily need a fast lens to create bokeh. So even if I'm doing portrait work, I've used longer lenses to do portraits just the same, and they look really cool because I can throw the background enough out of focus so it becomes more nondescript and less distracting. So shooting down a sideline, shooting in the gymnasium, what have you, again, you're knocking out the background just the same. And I'm shooting at f6.3, so it's not like I'm shooting, you know, at f2.8 or anything like that. And you don't necessarily need it. If you have the wherewithal to play that game, you know, again, I have a 500 f4, so I can go out there and play the selective focus game and get creative. So you have the ability to do that, but know that you can still do that with other long lenses just the same. It's going to be just a little different based on your subject distance and your background distance. Something that I harp on a lot is safety, and it's really, really important. There's a couple of stories that I tell because I've been tackled, I've been hit with every kind of ball imaginable. I've fallen out of vehicles, I've done stupid things. I've stared in the adversity of danger and then realized, uh-oh, this is going to hurt. So yeah, you know, one of my favorite stories that I tell is actually a tennis story. How many tennis fans in here? Okay, so there's a young lady by the name of Lindsay Davenport. Don't know if it resonates with anybody. Lindsay's not a small girl, and Lindsay serves hard. So I actually was working for another manufacturer at the time, and I'm shooting from what they call the dugout. It's at the end of the court, right behind where the line ref stands, and it's usually a broadcast camera in there. So we've got 6 or 8 people in there shooting, and I've got a bunch of people behind us, so there's nowhere to move. And I wanted the compressed shot of Lindsay serving because she is such a big girl, and I love the intensity of how she played. So she had just come back from maternity and was making her way through a Grand Slam tournament, and she lines this shot up. And at 138 miles an hour, I'm watching in my viewfinder as this ball is zeroing in on me. I'm thinking, yeah, this isn't happening. This is not happening. Right here, I take the first shot. Now, mind you, I'm standing below grade, so there's a little brick wall, and there's a microphone right underneath me on national TV. So I can't yelp, I can't say what I want to say. And I take the first one like a man. I got tears streaming down my eye, and the cop behind me was like, ooh, that hurt, didn't it? I'm like, you have no idea. The fireman thought it stopped my heart because I didn't breathe for a minute. She goes for the second serve, half-inch from the first one. Now I let out a yelp. I'm in agony. I've now have this lump growing out of my chest because I just got hit with a 136-mile-an-hour serve. Third serve, it's coming at me. Oh, hell no. I am not taking this one. I pushed the German photographer out of the way. The Getty photographer was shooting over my shoulder, slides right in, and I hear one of these, and then, I turn around. She tagged the 600-millimeter lens, broke the front element, and the camera punched him in the face, giving him a black eye. I said, I was not taking that one. Yeah. I've had football players pick me up and move me out of the way because I was in the line of the tunnel and they were running off the field. So to see a 400-pound guy pick me up and move me out of the way as I'm carrying like 80 pounds of equipment, like I'm a wet dish rag. I've been tackled. I've been hit with lacrosse balls. I have a friend that I shoot with that I refuse to shoot baseball with him because he's a magnet for foul balls. But yeah, every day is a different office. I don't know where I am. Here, I'm shooting, I love shooting the bull rides. I'm shooting from the back end of the corral with that 300 to 800 because you've got 1,200 pounds or 1,600 pounds of pissed off steak going for the wire. And I've watched these bulls actually go and get halfway or 3/4 of the way over the rail and gore somebody because they're upset. Working at 9,000 feet with an open door and a parachute strapped to my butt. My job was to document a tandem jump for a Purple Heart recipient who the only thing he didn't get to do in Iraq after 3 times of getting blown up was jump. So these Marines said, you're going to jump with us today and Mark is going to take pictures of us taking you out of the plane. Kind of cool. Team lead looks up at me after he throws his mark. He goes, Mark, remember, don't follow. I'm standing at the edge of a door at 9,000 feet. That's a long way down.
That's you right there?
No, actually, the foot in the back is another person who's holding on and strapped in because he doesn't want to fall. I'm the jackass running around inside the plane without any harnesses, and I'm standing right next to the doorway. I've got my foot on the other edge, shooting team lead. And then I'm waiting for them, and when they get this kid up to the front, the way they work it is they have a guy step out, and if you see here, this padding, the first guy steps out and holds on because his job is to guide the other jumpers out so they don't get hung up on the plane. They get the kid up to the front. The last guy goes, hey kid, as he turns his head to go, whoa, out the door. So there's no time to freeze. And then of course the team lead is the last guy out and he's like, don't follow, out the door he goes. By the way, this is my buddy that actually I won't stand next to at a baseball game because he's twice my size and the magnet for those foul balls. But I also have to remind him when he's doing this stuff to watch where he's stepping backwards because, well, again, accidents can happen and we've got to pay attention. But this is the yearbook stuff that we're doing for the girls' yearbook and they do this thing where they come through the crowd and they do the high fives and it's a cool photo, but you've got to be mindful not to step back on a ball or a stick or any kind of equipment. One of the races that I love doing is the Mint 400. It's an off-road race for trophy trucks. So I'm letting him know that he's got about 30 seconds till this happens. You've got these monster 900 horsepower trucks that are tear-assing through the desert at 130 plus miles an hour. So, I'm on the track and you can see I'm close enough that I can see the guy's look and he knows that I'm there. I've also been talked to again by the owner of the race who's a good friend. Please be careful because sometimes you get a little too close on the track, but I know what you're giving me image-wise. I just don't want to come visit you in the hospital or worse, put flowers on a gravesite. Doing aviation. This is a fun thing. I'm on the tarmac and I'm listening to all the stuff going on in the tower and I thought my autofocus went out on me when this P-51 came in. But this is the heat from these guys. So I had 5 F-18s fire up their engines, get ready to take off. First guy comes out, he's waving to let me know he's there. The second guy is actually bopping to AC/DC. And I'm listening to everything in my headset. But I'm right there. When I shoot motocross, I'm right there on the step up. I used to shoot beginner through expert. I'll only go out on the expert course because during a sanctioned race, this is the one I was telling you about before, where I could see the holy cow look in her face, and as she's mouthing the words, or some explicatives they're at, she's about to hit me, and I have to jump 35 feet down a dirt hill and cradle the camera and keep it camera. I was a little worse for the wear, but the camera and the lens I saved. So safety is important. Be mindful of your surroundings. It's really, really important. Changing conditions, and this is where I was talking about before. Everything happens in a moment's notice. So again, back to that 150 to 600 thing. If you're going to go out and play in the weather, just make sure that you're prepared for different things that are happening. No joke. I'm shooting surfing, and I'm looking to the left. Huntington Beach, California, beautiful sunny day. I turn to the right, and this is what I'm looking at. This is working its way up the beach at me. So you got to be prepared for any kind of a changing condition. Game started, we had a rain delay, then the rain stopped, and everybody thought we were safe. No, I can tell you exactly how much rain it takes to make a camera fail. Yeah, that's not pretty. But yeah, so be prepared. Be prepared. So this is back to the crop sensor thing now and full frame. So how many of you have crop sensor cameras?
I have one of each.
Okay. So does everybody understand the difference between an APS-C frame and because again, it's interesting when I get a mix of skill level in a room. And even though that some people think they have it, but they don't quite understand it. So if you're working with a crop sensor camera and you have a 100mm lens, because of the crop, you're not changing the focal length. And that's usually the mistake that most people make. You're changing the angle of view. You're getting a more compressed view of what you're looking at. So the greatest illustration I was able to do is something like this, where I took the same lens and I shot the same subject matter, just swapped out the camera to show you. So 800mm on a full frame camera to the left, and then just swap it out and put on the crop camera, the 7D or 7D Mark II or a D500. Then it looks like you've got more focal length, but what you're doing is cropping into the image. Advantage is that you're utilizing the pixel space more. Disadvantage is you have less wide angle. So you have to play both games. It depends on what you're doing. In a lot of cases, having the focal length is more important. So again, you have that 100 to 400, which is a full frame lens on that camera. Now I physically feel like I've got more focal length, and I don't have to add the teleconverter because I'm getting what I want, and I don't have to go and crop it. It's already being done, and I'm filling the frame, utilizing all the pixels. So the problem that you have when you start cropping images and throwing pixel information away, depending on where your output is going, is it can create havoc and play with the sharpness and everything else in the image. So how many people know how many megapixels does it actually take to make an 8x10 photograph? Anybody? 2. You were close. 2 megapixels to actually make an 8x10. Megapixels become really, really important is when you're cropping and or in your higher ISO ranges. So on a crop sensor camera, a lower pixel count does a heart better because you're going to get less noise. It's going to be cleaner. On a full frame camera, less pixels means you can crop less, but again, you're going to get definitely deeper, richer colors, more dynamic range. So you can play that game against each other. And kind of where I played the game here is that I took a medium format digital camera and I made it do what it's not supposed to do. So a Mamiya DM33, and one image looks real sharp, and when I cut away at 100%, I'm still sharp because I made my focus. So there's something called zone focusing. How many of you ever use that? Anybody? So if you've got a camera that's not fast enough to do a lot of frames, knowing that when I go to pull the trigger, I'm going to have a limited resource, I pick a point. So say the 20-yard line. So as the play starts to hit the 20-yard line and they're moving into the frame and I'm already focused on that point, hit the trigger. Now I'm more apt to get the image that I want in that frame rate because again, I'm tightening up the reins on everything and I'm utilizing a limitation to my advantage. So like here, this camera shoots like 1 frame every 3 minutes. That's how slow it is. It's medium format. You've got a sensor this big just flopping around. And the mirror just womp womp, womp womp. It's not a speed demon. So I know I've got maybe 2 frames to get this. And I made this poor guy do this like 100 times. So by the time he was done in 80-degree weather, he was tired. So now you can see on the left, it looks like I'm in focus. And I was actually focusing, but I missed my focus mark. And I pulled the trigger too soon, so when I zoom in at 100%, you can see I actually missed my focus. Now, when I was talking before, okay, so I'm going to show you something really interesting and cool. 7D Mark II, 10 frames a second. Hand holding on the beach, that 150 to 600. Again, I like my back button focus. I don't do continuous autofocus. So I started a ride where the guy grabbed the wave and it runs about 131 frames is what I did. But mind you, I'm working that button, doing my 3 to 5 frames, zooming, recomposing, because I learned how to shoot sports on a fully manual camera without autofocus. So you've got to zoom, you've got to compose, you've got to focus, you've got to do everything all at one time. And the cool thing is that you'll see my movements, and there are 3 frames that are out of focus. Just to show you how fast between camera and lens combination, this stuff reacquires focus and works. So this should... Now, you caught the first one that was out of focus, right? So when he caught the wave and came in, we were talking about probably about a 30 to 40 yard distance from out on the ocean into me, and then across probably another 50 yards. So I'm zooming and composing and shooting as this is happening, but out of that 131 frames, I can go back and pull out 128 like that, because that's how fast and how sharp everything is working for me. So experiment, practice with the back button if you can, and don't be afraid to go beyond just a continuous autofocus or the 3D tracking, because sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. On the Nikon bodies, you've got that box that you put up there in the 3D, but the box is going to jump around. It's like being on crack. You know, you can't necessarily follow that, and it's going to drive you absolutely crazy. Tracking, though, does work, and again, working that button and panning with your subject. How many of you like to pan? Okay, if you haven't, suggestion is find a park, a road that has a constant flow of cars or bicycles or what have you, and practice your panning. So shutter speed is also part of the whole thing. A little bit of motion blur also works in your panning to denote speed, but it's a matter of getting down the motion of the speed of what something's traveling at. So a bicycle and a car are going to be at 2 different speeds, or a plane for that matter. You know, a prop plane is different than a jet. You've got a jet moving at 800 miles an hour. The prop plane is screaming at 120 miles an hour across the sky. And even at that, that's easier to follow. But still, you've got to find that point of contrast and lock on that. I'm shooting at slower shutter speeds when I'm doing prop planes because I want the motion blur on the prop. So I'm at 125th of a second. You know, usually that rookie mistake, and I show that in here too, is that you've got the prop is dead stop in the air. Well, they ran out of gas and they're about to fall out of the air. You know, that's usually what it comes down to. So, and again, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So stopping your action, you know, there's nothing wrong with that because it looks cool and everything is tack sharp and it works. Jets, there are no moving parts, so shoot fast. You know, 2500th of a second or more. Prop planes, I want to bring that down. So a 250th is where I'm going to draw the line, because even still, that's too slow. There's not enough motion blur on that prop for me. That's what I really want. You know, that's what I'm looking for. And if you'll notice that the panning part also gives me more of the blur and the sense of speed. So, and it gives you more of that bokeh feel to it because now you're throwing the background out of focus. So as this guy's coming in for a dive run, I'm chasing him and following that. Taking it to another level, shooting at a slower shutter speed because I want the blur on the sticks. And you're gonna get head movement and you're gonna get body movement. Now, again, trick in concert photography is that we go black and white when the lighting is really abysmal and you've got a lot of noise. So you can hide some of that in there by doing that. It also, again, subject matter, it can add more emotion to it, which I kind of like, and it makes it timeless. So depending on the genre of music or what have you, but a lot of times now you'll find that they run these colored LED lights on stages and they suck. They're the hardest things to color balance to and or impossible to color balance to. So you get weird colors that are hard to kind of fix. And you don't want to spend hours and hours trying to fix that. You just want to kind of move on. This is an interesting one because I've got elements in here that are tack sharp and then elements that are blurry. If you look at the guy's helmet and the face, he's tack sharp. The body is shaking like crazy, so I'm picking up motion blur in the fiberglass body movement, but then again, I'm also shooting slow enough that you got the tire shake and the blur on the tires, and I'm kicking up the dirt. So it all kind of comes together. As long as you've got some elements that are sharp in there, a little bit of blur is where you want to head with that. This is one of those times where I'm shooting wide open because I'm working in absolutely zero light except for the torches. So too much, I'm getting too much depth of field, and I want to be able to just capture the flames and stop the action as quick as I can. As you can see, I'm still pushing limits. So, and the neat thing about it is that when the torches come around, there's a big burst of light, so the ISO tends to drop. One of the other formulas that I tend to use in my action shooting is that I'll make my ISO the variable, and I'll set my shutter and my aperture where I want it. So where I talk about this in some of the other classes that I do, think about a triangle. No matter what you do to that triangle, it's 360 degrees, right? So I can affect one or all three of those variables to get to the same point. So if I have a lens that I can open up an aperture, I can play around with the shutter speed and or the ISO to get to that point. So if I'm working with a slower lens, the ISO is going to be the more important variable in allowing me to get shutter speed. There are times that I want to change that around a little bit, and I'll play, if I have enough depth of field or enough distance, then you're able to actually call that out and play that game. There's an online resource. It's a depth of field calculator that you may want to check out. It's called Depth of Field Master. It's an online calculator that you could even get an application on your phone. And you could plug in your camera and your lens and even change up the camera from full frame to crop sensor, and it gives you all the math. And it explains about the depth of field. And it's kind of neat to see how the compression changes too, going from full frame to a crop sensor. So the math definitely changes on you and your properties change. So sometimes you can squeeze a little bit more out of a lens, you know, on a crop sensor camera than you could on the full frame. And you play both ends against each other in that case. Again, he's slowing down from over 300 miles an hour down to about 95-ish. So I'm still getting motion on the flames and the smoke, which is kind of neat. And then, of course, then he throws on the afterburner, and I've got nothing but smoke, so you don't see a whole lot. But it was hard to actually get the truck sharp and get the motion on the tires because of the amount of vibration in the vehicle itself. Motocrossers, they're narcissists. They love having their pictures taken. This guy waved me down as I'm walking off the track. He's like, one more shot. And he's pointing at the spot. So I'm like, all right, I posted myself, and I basically was able to get 9 frames off. And it almost seemed like he hung there just for me to get the right frame, which was kind of cool. Playing the sequence game. So in a hero shot, there's a formula that you'll notice in all of the papers, in all the magazines. It's one or both eyes. The ball is in the image, or usually right at the end of the hand. So like on a pitcher, the key is right on the release, and you want to see it right as you're releasing it, or a quarterback as he's about to release or shortly thereafter. Batter, ball is on the bat. Tennis player, ball compressed on the racket. These are the golden images. But you can shoot sequences to figure out, great action shots and while that's not terrible, that better, but I kind of goofed and moved my cropping there. And then again, great action shot, but there's no ball in there, so that's really a throwaway. So again, watching your surroundings, hyper-focusing. Sometimes you got to go manual focus. Watch where you're standing. Foul lines, you don't want to cross them. You don't want to get hit. You don't want to get hurt. Shooting around other people can be an issue. And, again, how many of you have seen this before with your autofocus? Well, job of autofocus is to grab the first point of contrast. That fence is right in front of you. You can hyper-focus through the fence. With autofocus, that's kind of where you're going to be. But with a manual focus, you can make it disappear. Then you've got the other challenge of, if you're on the inside, I missed my focus. But if you notice, there's something that's detracting from where my autofocus should have been. And, whoop. So it went through there on its own. The coach's butt. So I got a full moon. Monopods come in handy for moving people out of your way too, by the way. So I let the coach know, dude, I'm here because, this is a rival game and these are seniors. They're not getting another shot at beating this other school. Let's think about this for a second. I'm here to reward you guys with images, and this is what's going in the paper. Think about it. Perspective, another thing. How many of you like shooting children, little kids? They're actually a lot of fun. So get down, get low on their level, make them look larger than life. Piece of cardboard, something to kneel on. The getting down is easy, and as we get older, the getting up part is the hard part. So make sure that you've got a way to get yourself off the ground. But also, again, I like sitting down because I get the right perspective and I'm looking up, back at the player, and able to keep it kind of at a neat angle. And again, there are times that you're not going to be able to compress the player and single them out on the field and eliminate all of the distractions. There are times, however, when you can do that. So, AAA game, I got behind the plate in the stands, shooting through the backstop to get the pitcher. Again, playing the silly game of how much trouble can I get in? I climbed up on the flag stand and used a fisheye lens to shoot hanging off the stand as these cars are passing me at well over 100 miles an hour. I don't recommend that all the time, but if you want to get an interesting perspective, think outside the box. The sad part is that the ball is about 5 feet in the air over his head, and there's not enough lens in order for me to capture that. I just like the body language and the symmetry. So to capture some of that, I actually went up higher into the stands to be able to get the shadows and some of the different positioning of the ball. So if you want the ball in the shot, especially on a serve, that's important. Or shoot real wide and then know that he's going to be this big in there and you're going to get the ball 8-9 feet over him in the air. And this is actually where I was talking about that 18-300 earlier. So this is an 18-300 on a 7D Mark II from about 80-90 yards out. Not too terrible, huh? So it works. Getting creative with a 150-600 and an extension tube. So I was able to reduce my working distance. I'm about 5 feet away from the owl. He's not pleased with me. He actually wants to tear me apart. And he's watching me because he's not sure what's going on. And he sees his reflection in the front element, which is even cooler because now he thinks there's another owl there. So he's not sure about me and the owl because he keeps looking around, checking out me and then the reflection. 12-24, right off the corner of the tire, and I'm able to get all of the other cars compressed in there. So you've got a really neat perspective, and it's not bending it. This is what I was talking about before, how straight that 12-24 is. 150-600, my 18-35. I'm about 6 inches off this guy's nose. And then here's the fun part, watching horizon lines. I had just got done shooting a whole week of fashion, so I've got that creative tilt going on in my head. And then, they're like, oh, by the way, dude, since when do you see a football field on a hill? Oops. take advantage of watching the top of the helmets, fences, buildings, the bleachers, something to be able to control your horizon line. There should be some markings on your lens as well, that if you're on a monopod, you have like 4 different marks on that tripod collar that should give you pretty much where the home position and your 90-degree points are. So you should be able to find a horizon line to keep yourself level. And backlighting is something else that I love to exploit when I have the opportunity, because it just adds drama to the images, a whole different depth. So there are times that the backlighting works better for you than the direct head-on light. So it adds a little bit more to the image itself. As we're coming into the home stretch on this, so body language, action. You know, you can follow any sport. If you don't know the actual sport, you can pretty much figure it out at a point. Understanding the rules, understanding how the game is played is important. But if you want to know where the ball is, if you want to know what's next, where they're going to move next, watch their eyes. Because like I could sit and watch a tennis game and know exactly where the ball is on the court by the return and watching the other player's eyes. So if I'm concentrating on his return volley or whatever's happening next, I know where it's going to happen. Or based on his reaction, I know to spin around and watch the other player. So I want to position myself at a point where I can work that. How many of you like to shoot lacrosse? Lacrosse is probably the best test of your mettle out there, because it's a soccer, football, hockey game wrapped in one, and it moves fast. I don't recommend standing behind the goal in the crease, because lacrosse balls hurt a lot. They're like little balls of concrete, and they fly at like well over 100 miles an hour. So if you're going to do that, you'll notice who the more aggressive team is right out of the gate, and stay slightly off to the corner of the crease. This way you're getting the attack on goal, but you're able to track and compress the images coming downfield or follow them midfield. Some fields you'll actually have a secondary fence behind the goals. So if you're really feeling dangerous and you have a really long lens, you can stand behind that fence and shoot head on to the goal, which I've done a few times. But know that you've got part of you that's not protected. And if some of those stray balls come at you because they're shooting on goal, just know to move out of the way quickly, because it's going to hurt if you don't. Emotion, huge. James Blake, guy's got heart. Overthinks his game, but the guy's got heart. Complete meltdown, knowing that I just didn't go home with $1 million. Someone enjoying their thing. In one with nature. I love the hand. That's what does it for me on this one. You know, shooting a curl is cool, but just having that hand and then the silhouette of them inside the tube is kind of cool. Watching these behemoths get emotional just before or after a game. Seeing somebody completely light up on stage when they're doing their thing and they're in their element. Again, changing direction, changing position. I knew what was going to happen towards the end of the match. I changed my position to get up by where the ESPN cameras were and shoot down on the court. So this way I knew what was going to happen, and it looks like he's celebrating for me. But I'm right there in the middle of the action and got the shot. Had him land in my lap once, long before he was famous, because he, again, ran for the ball and missed and ended up in the photo pit. Not uncommon. Night game, that 150 to 600, so don't let the variable aperture thing slow you down in the least. Bump the ISO. Like I said, I'm not afraid to shoot ISO 3000 on my cameras, and it works. I'm about 90 yards out here. This one you've seen before. The struggle, it's real. These guys battled for like 3.5 minutes before they actually moved a step. And if you're gonna go down in style. So this is that image I was telling you about before. He's now in the military somewhere, but he would come and run the field. This was one of the coolest things I watched. This guy came to the beach holding his board. He's in a suit and tie, drops the board, drops his towel, drops his stuff, wraps a towel around his waist, gets into his shorts, pulls off the tie, grabs his board, and hits the water. That was cool to watch this. How many of you shoot motocross or like motocross? Anybody? Yeah.
A couple of times.
Okay, so up to the age of 13, they're allowed to receive help picking the bike up from adults. This kid is 12, going on 13. He refused the help, and this is a sanctioned race that I'm shooting down in Dallas. You see that 22? In his age group, he's 22 in the state of Texas. This is a kid's career that you want to watch because this guy is going to be a champion. He went ass over end in a row of 35 riders. He picked the bike up and finished in the top 5. So yeah, intensity. I mean, you could see it in the face. The eyes tell the whole story. He was not pleased. He was more angry at himself. He got back on the bike and finished the race. Again, my guy James Blake doing his thing, compressing the scene. What would have made it absolutely perfect if the line ref didn't stick her head out. But nonetheless, the USTA was very happy to see the logo and everything else right there. So that worked out as a really great image for them. Just, again, this is one of those frames from that sequence. And then, of course, the last guy out of the water at the end of the day, down to the last wave. So, with that said, thank you.